Thanks for staying with us on Point. Now, the late Jonathan Ball has been described as a larger-than-life personality who ushered in a new era of publishing in South Africa under the imprint that still bears his name. In 1978, the first Jonathan Ball hit was an exposé of the Broederbond. The book took South Africa by storm and set the pace at Ball's publishing house. Nastassia Arendse spoke to the current CEO of those publishers about the late publishing disruptor.
I took over from Jonathan actually 6 years ago, but all in all, we probably worked together for 23 or 24 years. And in that time, I obviously worked incredibly closely with him. John was a remarkable man. You know, he's the most lasting thing for me is that he really was a liberal in the true sense of the word. He believed that books should be published, that opinions mattered, and very much occupied the world of ideas. And the company that we have today, Jonathan Ball Publishers, which is 45 years old this year, very much represents that great belief and tradition.
Right. I mean, last year we had you on the show and you were talking about the publishing industry in South Africa, and we touched a little bit on some of the issues, but perhaps let's take it a little bit more forward. In your reflections of the past year, publishing in a period of COVID, how do we deal with some of the issues that still occur in the publishing industry in South Africa?
Look, I think the first thing to say is that publishing has been remarkably resilient the world over. Unfortunately, in South Africa, not as much as in other parts of the world. But, you know, if you go and look at publishing in Italy or Belgium, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Australia, even North America, book sales grew in the year of COVID because I think people returned to reading, and I think that leisure very much changed. In South Africa, I think our challenges still remain as they were a decade ago and as they probably were, 2 decades before that. The reality is that it is a victim of the economy. And I think that books are, while they on parity with international prices, they perceive to be expensive in South Africa. So that I think is a major issue in terms of access to books for people. And then of course literacy is an enormous challenge. But on the whole, the reality, I think, is that South Africa's book business is and still remains relatively healthy. It's big enough to sustain its own publishing, and with a little bit of luck, we could see some growth in the years to come.
Talk to me about what Jonathan Ball is doing in, developing black authors, black talent, and having more, talent coming through that publishing industry.
It's an interesting question. Obviously, what we've done is that we've at the very outset we've appointed a Black African publisher and editor whose job and principal brief is to go out there and find books that will serve that market. But I think the question's asked the wrong way around, because the reality is that publishers the world over follow the market. And I think that the transformation that people are seeking really is determined by the buying habits of the public. And so as soon as there's been a massive growth, for instance, in romantic fiction, Black African romantic fiction, it's an enormous growth area in publishing. And publishers are now pursuing that area as an area of growth. So they're going out there to find people who can write those books. I think the misconception in publishing is that we somehow stand between a person, an author who's written a book, and the great public out there. The reality is, if there's a viable market for any book, I'm convinced that there will be a publisher out there who will take it on. And in an instance where the author can't find a publisher these days, you have countless self-publishing options. So the publishers, I think, will ultimately follow the market, if that answers your question.
Yeah. On that note then, I mean, in what other subject areas are you seeing an interest or demand? Because, I mean, over the past couple of years, or perhaps even 2 years ago, there was, a topic around the Guptas and state capture and various other things as it relates to that particular area. You saw a lot of those books on the shelves. What are you seeing in the next probably year or so in terms of the kind of topics we might see on the shelves?
And look, I think that current affairs and non-fiction are always going to be a major subject area in South African publishing. We are a very non-fiction dominated publishing industry. But what's really encouraging is seeing people like Lazy Makati coming through in terms of cookery and lifestyle. There's a lot of particularly African lifestyle coming through at the moment, and I think that's a fantastic area of growth. In terms of the market in general, I think there has been a little bit of a movement away from serious books, if that makes any sense. I think that people are a bit tired of the negative, but in my mind, that's only ever going to be momentary. And as soon as there's another major development within the ANC or within government or within any area of business, there'll be a major non-fiction book that will follow, and it'll shoot out the lights for sure.
How do you measure the success rates of your titles? I mean, is there a book that comes to mind in the years that you spent at Jonathan Ball that has done extremely well?
There are many books. There are many books that have done extremely well in our own publishing and in the books that we represent from foreign publishers in South Africa. I mean, just quickly comes to mind, for instance, Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, which I think has sold about 400,000 copies in 2 or 3 editions already, which is an absolutely incredible number for South Africa. And then on the more sort of localized front, Justice Malala, recently with his last book, that would have sold about 15,000 copies. Peter de Toy with his Stellenbosch Mafia is now over 40,000 copies, and in fact in a second edition. So how you measure the success? Well, you've got those outrageously big selling titles, and those are wonderful. But really, I think a publisher measures the success by selling out the print run. So even if you've only printed 1,500, if you sell all 1,500, I think that's a success.
Right, my colleague Diabo is standing by with some SME on point for you.